Welcome to the Mindfulness of Singing, and I'm Denise, your sassy, spunky scientist.
And I'm Tony, your bubbly, big-hearted flower child.
Our podcast features practical tips and tools for a journey of transformation using the healing power of your voice.
Each podcast, we will delve into the mind, body, and spirit connection by interviewing inspirational guests, sharing personal stories, and discussing the most recent scientific research.
Tune in and join our community of mindful singers. What's your subject you want to talk about today?
I want to talk about the brain, Denise. I've been doing a lot of reading and research about the Silva method. It's a method that's been around for many, many years about programming your brain. And last night, I don't think this was something I got from somebody else. I think it just came in my own little brain. But I was thinking about why are people interested in what I'm going to share? But the saying that came to me in my sleep was, change the rate, change the state. And so if you change the rate of the form of your brainwave form, you will change the state of your emotional state and mental state. And Denise, I know, being the brilliant woman that you are and that you study many things, have you ever memorized the different brainwave categories and know
Like
which is
alpha and theta and beta?
do you know?
I know of them. Like theta is like where you are when you're like in flow and, or, yeah. I mean, I've looked at it, but I can't really. No, I don't know that much about it.
Okay, I think you and I are probably on the same page. We're familiar with the terms, but haven't locked it in as something that really could be quite valuable for singers, for anybody who wants to bring more awareness and mindfulness to their life, to think about what brainwave state you're in. We track everything else. Why not one of the most important things in our body? So
Yeah, there are actually gadgets where you can do that.
right. But this was just step one before we even got to the gadget, was for Tony to try to start to memorize the different brainwave states. So,
Okay.
I like to do things in a silly, fun way.
Yes.
So I took a look at a pop song.
I was going to say, so you sang a song about it.
No, but yes. So first of all, I put them in the right order of the slowest to highest, the lowest. So if you think about, like, if you saw the waveform for delta, it's going to be more like a drum. It's very wide and very slow. And then the highest is going to be more like a flute, and that's gamma. So if you said them in order, you would have DTABG, which says developing the absolute best game, and D for delta.
Did you make up that little? Did you make that up?
I did.
Developing the absolute best game.
And now I bet you can tell me what they are.
Delta, theta, developing the alpha, beta, gamma.
See, I just taught you the sequence just like that. Bam!
Wow. You should teach.
we do want to develop the absolute best game. And so now that you know the order from the lowest to the highest, from the drum to the flute, now I'm going to teach you what each one is, and you're going to be able to tell me exactly what they are, and you're going to memorize them just like that. So for delta, this is your Dream Weaver. I know they're old songs, Denise, but
Dream Weaver.
That's the one.
Oh my gosh, I love that song. Okay.
So,
yeah.
but delta is dream. That's your dream state. That's the one where you're trying to track to get that deep dream state, is delta. Delta dream. You're never going to forget now which is delta is dream. Then the next thing we have is theta. And as you come out of that dream state, you're in the twilight zone, which is theta. Because would you like to give us a rendition of that? Yeah. Twilight, because you really are in that in-between state of
right, like twilight.
Yep. Right. Yeah. Not being fully asleep and not being fully awake. I was going to play each one of these for you, but computer issues.
No.
Anyway, then the next
that'll take too long.
Yeah. The next one is, it's all right now, all right, which stands for alpha, because alpha is the state that you want to get into for meditation, for calm, for self-guidance, for inquiry, awareness, all those things. So when we have Dreamweaver, Twilight Zone, all right now, and then I wish this was more positive, but I was limited on search time. I just thought of this yesterday, but songs that start with B for brain, because beta is that brain wave place where you're thinking, and sometimes that gets a bad rep, but we glad we are able to think and to process, and sometimes we need beta state too, but we just need to be aware of which state we want to be in at which time. I can remember back in
I don't want to be in beta wave when I'm trying to go to sleep.
Exactly. And I learned early on years ago that if I study a lot before bedtime, my brain is just chewing on that information and I don't sleep well. I don't get into delta because I programmed myself to be in beta. Well, how many other things in our life, Denise, are we programming ourselves for the wrong brainwave, for the wrong state? So
Well, that's interesting.
So we're going to hold on to that. Change the rate, change the state of your being by changing.
Okay, so what's your song for beta?
If I only had a brain. I got to find something more positive, but beta is brain. There's beautiful mind, beautiful brain, but I couldn't find a B song for brain. I just don't, there's not much out there. But if I only had a brain. And then the last one, gamma, that's the highest level. That's the feelings of love, the highest place of coherence. And gamma is good vibrations. So there's
good vibrations. Okay. Yep. All right.
Now you know the different, and you won't forget them. And I think our next project is going. I'm going to give you a little teaser, but we have to discuss it first before I drop it on you. But it's going to have to do with a challenge that will help us alter our brainwave states to create more coherence in our own personal lives. So now you will be prepared and have it memorized. If someone should quiz you tomorrow on the sequence, you would be able to tell them. So there you have it.
Give us the thingy one more time.
With the songs or the absolute. Your goal is to develop the
absolute best game. Very good. I like that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So, I've been on a deep dive for sleep. So it's funny that you've been talking about that. And sleep is one of those things that when I don't get good sleep, for one of the first things that goes is my voice. It will really become like low in the basement, and I can't really sing in my middle voice very well. And it's just so much harder to sing. And sleep is so important well, we're discovering now for pretty much everything. Like sleep is one of the main pillars of health and maintaining good health, including your own metabolism, your own ability to keep glucose out of your system, which if you have raised glucose, then you can become pre-diabetic or become diabetic. All of those things they're finding are linked to sleep, not just your diet, not just exercise, but actually sleep quality, good quality sleep. And I've always been a really great sleeper. Like you put me in a car, and if I'm not the one driving, I'm out, I'm asleep. Put me in an airplane, I can sleep unless I'm cold. But all things being equal, I can sleep on a plane, a train, an automobile. It may not be the best quality sleep, but I can sleep. And it hasn't been until last few years that I've struggled with sleep. And some of that's been hormonal. And, as that's calmed down, I've gone back to being a pretty good sleeper. But I share a bed with a person and a dog. And I think the people in the 50s had a pretty good idea by having twin beds in the bedroom. But anyway, that's a different podcast. Yeah. And so, I'm awakened at various times in the night, so my sleep's not as good. And so I've been, trying to do a deep dive on sleep. So here's what I've discovered. Magnesium glycinate, huge for sleep. Glycine is really big for sleep. And if you can get some glycine in bulk, you put it in your hot tea at night. And what I suggest, and just no caffeine tea, of course, herbal tea, but certainly valerian tea. Valerian root is a sedative. In fact, but the indigenous people would take valerian root and they'd knock people out with it. Like, it's literally a big time sedative. Of course, we use it in small amounts, so it's not a sedative. It's not going to knock you out for several days, but it will, if you had enough of it, it would. But you have just enough that it makes you drowsy and helps to get you in a lower wave, brainwave, perhaps. I'm not sure on the science on that. I'd have to look that all up and do some reading. But anyway, they do know that valerian root adds a little sedative. So I take this is what I've been doing. I bought some beautiful organic loose leaf valerian tea. And it has some other stuff in it. Some cinnamon. I mean, it's a good flavor, some vanilla, stuff like that. I put some glycine in it, a tablespoon, which is a lot. That's about 5 grams. But the thing about that glycine is it has 0 calories. It looks like white sugar, feels like white sugar. It doesn't bake up. I've tried baking with it. It doesn't bake up quite as good as white sugar. It will stay grainy a little bit. It needs liquid to melt it, kind of break it down a little bit. So, but in a tea or something like that, it's quite lovely, and you can put it in your tea. It's not going to make your glucose levels go up or anything like that. So you put a tablespoon of that. That's quite a bit, and I know, and it'll make it very, very sweet, but it's great. And then if you can buy, I think you can get this at Whole Foods. I believe that's where I bought mine. It was either at Whole Foods or at a local, supplement and health food place. But they come in a little package and look a lot like those cold tablets that you drop in water, and what is it, airborne, I think is what they're called, or whatever. They look like that, but they're magnesium, and they're magnesium bicarbonate. So when you drop them in, they fizz up, right? And you get this breakdown of the magnesium bicarbonate in your tea and the glycine in your tea. And man, I am drowsy when the time comes. So yeah, and I think it's interesting that you say, when you study something before you go to bed, you're sort of in that brainwave. I had not really thought about that, because right now I'm studying for an exam, and I'm reading the stuff that I need to read before I go to sleep. So I'm going to not do that tonight. I'm going to see if that makes a difference in how quickly I get into REM and deep sleep, because I wear my ring that tells me when I'm in each state. And the last few nights, and maybe I can't say this for sure because I can't quite remember, but it may be that it's been since I started studying for my exam before I go to bed.
That has pros and cons. Not doing it, you'll sleep better, but I would find that the information I didn't know, if I put it in at night, I knew it better in the morning. So
yeah, there is that. The great thing about what I'm studying, though, is that it's not necessarily it's not like it's
facts and figures,
economics or math or something like that. It's really, I just need to be able to write about it and be able to talk about it in my own words, right? So as long as I understand the concepts and know what theories I'm talking about, then I'm good. But anyway, so I think maybe I won't do that. I will stop studying and stop doing that sort of thing before I go to bed. 30 minutes, they say before you go to bed, you should be like in the bed 30 minutes before you decide you want to be asleep. So I try to be asleep by just before midnight every night. And I know that's That is not Tony. It's 9 o'clock for her. But I'm my best version of myself at night. So I I try to shoot for asleep by midnight. So I try to be in bed by 11:30, do a little bit of reading or whatever. But so I think I'll not read my book for studying purposes and see if that helps me get into deep sleep a little quicker, because or stay in it. I should say I get into it right away. I'm one of those people. I go to sleep at midnight and I'm in deep sleep until about 1 o'clock off and on for between that hour, and then I may not get any more deep sleep the rest of the night, and that's not good. We know that you need at least 30% of deep sleep. Now, do you know why you need deep sleep?
Regeneration happens during deep sleep.
That's when the brain actually cleans up. It comes in and it cleans out all of that white matter that builds up in people who have Alzheimer's or dementia. It cleans out that. There's a link between not having deep sleep and having an incident, having an propensity for dementia and Alzheimer's. So it cleans out that amyloid plaque, they call it, white matter that gets in the brain. It cleans up inflammation that can happen over the period of the day, especially if you've been exposed to any kind of toxins in your diet or something you may have breathed in. So it does that. And do you know what REM sleep does?
Rapid eye movement.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it stands for. But do you know what it does? Do you know what its purpose is?
I assume all of it is cleaning and regeneration, but no, you'll have to tell me, enlighten me.
No, that's where you consolidate memories. Isn't that interesting? So while you're dreaming, your brain is consolidating the experiences that you had that day and the experiences that you may be having that week or whatever, and consolidates them and puts them in the places it needs to go so you can recall it the next day.
Cool.
That is
It's
cool.
Organizing the.
I always say, well, the little man who runs the file room up there, when I can't remember something, I said, he'll find the file eventually. He'll be here shortly. And then I wait for him to bring me the file. And then I'm like, I know what I was going to say. Because there's a lot of memories to consolidate when you've been alive as long as I have. So anyway. All right, this is great. And I think we're going to love our guest today, who I've not met, but is your friend.
Yes, let me tell you about Mark Moliterno.
Please.
He is a professional singer, a writer, a yogi. He's been practicing yoga for many years. And what happened was, as he was singing and traveling and performing, his colleagues would say, well, can I do that with you? And they discovered their own singing improving. And that eventually led to another career path of teaching people to become YogaVoice instructors. And I've had the privilege of doing that with him and taking the training.
That's his own business, right? Like it's trademarked and it's his own business.
But he has expanded it and now has a partner, a lovely young lady that helps him with it. And together they're taking it to even greater dimensions. So
that's great.
Without any further ado, I want to introduce Mark Moliterno, a brilliant man and just an all-around great guy. To introduce my dear friend, Mark Moliterno.
Hello.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, Mark. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Come stai?
Sto bene. E tu?
Bene, bene. I was thinking, Mark, that when I first met you, I was in a really not the greatest of places, mentally, emotionally, and certainly not singing wise. And a question that I asked you was, how do you even start practicing when you don't feel like practicing? And so to come full circle, and now on Monday, I'll be recording a song that I wrote about the gratitude of practicing. So thank you, Mark, for being a part of my healing journey. And YogaVoice has certainly been a part of that. I've had the pleasure of studying with Mark a lot both in the training and privately. And so, Mark, why don't you tell our listeners who may have not, I can't imagine it, but they might not have heard of YogaVoice. So can you give them an overview of what that's all about?
Yeah. So YogaVoice is really it's the culmination and the reflection of my entire life as an artist and as a teacher, as an artist, and as a yoga practitioner and yoga teacher and yoga therapist. I started my professional life as an opera singer. I did the things that everyone does. I lived in New York. I waited tables. I did the whole thing. But I had also about 35 years ago, 35 years ago now, I started a yoga practice when I lived in Los Angeles. And so, and I have maintained it since. And so for a long time, these two paths went on in my life. And I'll tell you, when I first started practicing yoga, I knew immediately that I would do it the rest of my life. And my teacher there, my mentor, Larry Payne, who is a well-known yoga therapist and is big in the yoga therapy world in America, was my mentor and my model. And all I ever really wanted to do was be a yoga therapist. But then I had this other thing that I did, which was singing. So these two tracks went along in my life for many, many years. And then I started to recognize where the two sort of crossed, and where yoga and singing were able to inform one another. And I started practicing some of the thoughts I had about yoga and specifically systematic voice technique, which is how I learned from my teacher Richard Miller at Oberlin in the 80s. And where those two cross, systematic voice technique and yoga, there were specific ways to relate the vocal techniques of the bel canto to the mind body through yoga. And so I made those connections, and I started developing a system for teaching it. And it has now grown into something that I train people, and I do trainings all over the world, and I train people all over the world, and we have a teacher training program. And so now that's where YogaVoice is. But it's really been a really beautiful culmination of all the different strands of my life.
So for a person who's not ever had a YogaVoice instruction, can you tell me what you mean by yoga therapist? Because I think of a yoga practitioner, or I think of a yogi, but when you throw in the word therapy, I'm a little, no, I don't know what you mean.
So it's a good question. In many ways, all yoga is therapeutic. I mean, it's very hard to find a yoga unless you're not doing yoga. I mean, if you're doing exercise without the mindfulness aspect, and that's what makes yoga, I think, yoga, is that it's the my little catchphrase, it's the simultaneous awareness of your body, your breath, and your thoughts all at the same moment. That's what yoga is. It's the drawing together of those aspects of your being in an activity. And so we do postures, we do breathing, we do all those things, but the mind, where's the mind in all of that? So if you're really involved mentally in your physical or breathing practice, or even in your ethical practices in your life, you're practicing yoga. So yoga in a lot of ways is completely therapeutic. And in fact, the whole program of yoga, the whole project of yoga, from the Yoga Sutras, from its origin, is really about creating wholeness and calming the fluctuations in our consciousness that create disharmony and imbalance and ultimately disease. So all yoga, in a way, is therapeutic. But when we talk about yoga therapy in America, we're talking about a specific way of applying yoga practice for therapeutic use. And it can have different forms. It can be more physical. So we can think about yoga therapy for like a healthy back. We can think about yoga therapy for neck and shoulders. We can think about yoga therapy for heart conditions. And all of the practices of yoga would relate to specific uses for specific medical conditions. But on the broader level, and what I'm really interested in with yoga therapy, is how does it deal with stress? Because I really believe that stress is the killer. And stress is the thing that leads to many of these other imbalances. So we take a holistic, and I mean the people that taught me and the approach that I've studied and which I practice. We take a view of the person as a whole entity. We look at the whole person, mind, body, and spirit, and we look at how um, aligning those three things also begins to deal with stress and helps us to deregulate and downregulate our stress. And in the singing world, this is really important, I think, because a lot of people, a lot of students come to singing with a lot of anxiety. Especially, we were talking, Denise, just a few moments ago about current students in the current generation, and we both agree that a lot of them carry a lot of anxiety. And so at the college level, especially. So working with this way of looking at how can we balance the mind, the nervous system, all of that stuff, yoga is a great help for that. So that's where the therapeutic use comes in.
And if I can add to that too, Denise, it's just another level of certification. Like a lot of people have a level 1 yoga teacher training, level 2 yoga therapy is another level of yoga certification.
Yeah, and I didn't know that. And I've taken a lot of yoga over the years. I mean, gone to gyms or whatever that are having a yoga class, and and I've tried hot yoga and all the things, and I just was under the impression, and I think a lot of Americans are, that yoga is an exercise routine. It's not so much about the mind, because I can tell you, when I go to a yoga class, my mind's going, holy crap, how am I supposed to do that?
Right.
I mean, that's what my mind's saying. That, or damn, this hurts.
Yeah, that's where we failed you then, I think, as yoga teachers.
Really, this
so
is
much more than that.
Distinction, and this is the kind of distinction that actually guides my teaching. You're right. In the West and in America, yoga has became exercise for a long time. But I do think the pendulum is swinging, and I think that especially as people understand that there's more to it than what you just described, and the mindfulness piece is so important. So it's not really even so important how deep you get into a posture, or even the proficiency with which you practice your postures. It's the entrance and exit into the postures that actually creates the yoga, and how we move mentally and how we move with our breath. So breath, I wrote in the Musician's Breath, which is a book was published in 2010. I talk about the breath as the connecting tissue between, or a connector between, the mind and the body. And this is a picture from yoga, from the kosha model. And the breath really centers you in that balance between mind and body. And that's why physical asana practices really always need to be guided by breathing, and they should be breath-based, and awareness of breath. So you're really thinking, you're being aware of your breathing as you're doing your practice. And then just to pick up on what Tony said, so yoga therapy now is, in our country, a certification. You cannot call yourself a yoga therapist, even if you've taught yoga for 40 years and you've helped people and healed people. If you don't actually have a yoga therapy certification, which is a 3-year program,
wow,
then you cannot call yourself a yoga therapist. And Yoga Alliance is very clear about this in the way in their structure. So I do have a yoga therapy degree. I have it. I was actually in the first early group of people that were certified in this country through the International Association of Yoga Therapists, and they started certifying people, I guess, in about 2012. So so it's a thing, and I'm fortunate to have that in my life.
Wow, that's amazing. I thank you for the education, because I really had zero idea about that. Mm-hmm. That's very, very cool.
But she has seen YogaVoice in action, because when I've gone to visit Denise, you know me, I can't sit still or be quiet. And so I've jumped in sometimes, and we've enjoyed kind of collaborating. And so her students have had some YogaVoice exposure. And then when she taught at a different university, I came and did a master class and did some yoga.
Cool. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so obviously, for singers, the breathing component is so vitally important, and the mindfulness of breathing. And then, so what I do with YogaVoice, back to YogaVoice, is I'm really aware. I try to cultivate awareness through YogaVoice. We become aware of how our breath moves, corresponds to physical movement. We become aware of even the fact that we're breathing, which and how we prepare our breath and how we use our breath and how we embody our breath and how we release our breath. And then we use physical postures to begin to unwind some of the tensions that might block our breathing or might interfere with our breathing. And then, as you know from Tony's probably demonstrations, we use the chakra system to. That's where we connect the systematic vocal technique, the singing techniques of the bel canto in the body through an awareness of the chakra system and the energies of the chakras and how those correspond to different energies that we create in singing. So it becomes a pretty comprehensive program, but I really do believe that it's fundamentally about creating awareness and self-mastery, physically, mentally, and with your breathing that allows your voice to really be what it already is. Let's put it that way. So I start from the assumption that you already have the voice you have. It's never going to actually get better because it's what you were born with. We can't replace what goes on in here. We can't replace it with a Steinway. Or we can't change the model. We can't improve. But what we can do is become very aware of the patterns that we bring to our singing that come from everyday life, actually, and from our living, that actually impede our voice. So there are times when then our learned habitual patterns of life show up in our singing. And those can be things like tension in the body. Those can be mental things like, fear or shame or grief or anything. Those patterns can show up in the way you use your voice. And so YogaVoice is actually, in a lot of ways, about removing the blockages and removing the impedances to the voice that's already in there. And so the technique is about recognizing your own wholeness. And that's not to say we can't improve at, how we onset a tone or how we free our voices to have easier registration. But in my estimation, it really comes out of removing the blocks in the body that impede that, because most voices can already do that stuff if they're not blocked. So, and I guess that's, again, in a lot of ways where the therapeutic mindset comes, is that we're trying to restore balance. And that's what the yoga that's kind of the essence of what YogaVoice is about.
Yeah, I love it so much. I love the concept of it, and one of the things that I struggle with in terms of my own teaching, a couple of things. One is I used to teach the way I was taught, taking a ton of air, as much air as you possibly can, right? Mm-hmm. And then try to stay out and push down and all of that. And, it never really served me very well. And I even went to like a physical therapist and tried to get help with it. And the physical therapist said, I don't know what to tell you, but one side of you just doesn't work the way the other side of you does. And it's never going to be that. You're just not built in that way. And and I'd go back to my teacher and she'd go, if I can do it, you can do it. And I'd be like, oh, but the physical therapist says that's not true. And she'd be like, I don't believe her, and anyway, so, it just felt so overwrought sometimes. And, but I taught what I was taught for a lot of years until I really began to really read a lot about breath and breathing and got into the breathwork space. And it was like I went, oh my gosh, I'm totally teaching. I'm not going to throw all my fellow voice teachers under the bus, but I'll throw myself under the bus. I am totally teaching the wrong way to breathe to these singers who are already so overwrought with anxiety that asking them to breathe in a way that makes them feel like they're hyperventilating and that they're more anxious is not serving them well. And so I sort of began to undo the stuff that I was teaching there and found that when I have a singer like just breathe through their nose, and feel how much more deeply that goes easily, and allowing the natural vacuum to happen, and inertia, and the physics, the science of it to just work on its own without all the overwrought gulping in and trying to suck in the room of air, that
Mhm.
they do so much better, and they can actually sing longer. And I'm wondering what you think about that, because so often when I go to yoga class, right, they'll go breathe deep, and now, and so how do you make those things? Am I crazy, Mark?
No, you're not. And
Yeah, she is, but that's nothing to do with the answer to the question.
so we're entering a topic that I feel very passionate about, actually. Um, and it's a big topic. And so I'll try to speak to it succinctly. Um, you've said a couple things, a couple important things. First of all, and I agree with you that most voice teachers will teach what they've been taught.
Yes. So I think you be prepared. We're going to get kicked out of Nats.
And this is not a judgment. I just think this is fact. It's not a judgment. It's not necessarily bad. I don't think it's bad. In fact, I try in my teaching to get rid of the whole dualistic language of good and bad. So it is what it is, right? It's a fact.
Fair enough.
I do think I personally feel grateful that I was trained by a pedagogue who opened the doors of inquiry rather than insistence, and helped me to think of the voice as an anatomical fact machine. I think of it as a closed system. I think of it as something that is what it is.
You're talking about Richard Miller.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And anatomically, the voice does what it does. Your body does what it does. So when your therapist said your body doesn't work that way, she was right, right? Because there's no breath in your abdomen. There's no breath in your pelvic floor. There's no breath in your gut pushing out. The breath is in your lungs, and breath is governed by the movement of your ribs, and governed by volume and shape. So in your body. So what I firmly believe is that all voice teachers should know the anatomical facts about what the instrument does. There are certain facts to human respiration and human phonation, um, in terms of how it all works most efficiently. There are many ways to do it. They're not all efficient. So what honors the instrument in its efficiency and in its health? So that's the first thing. Then you can use language, different kinds of language, to get the student to do those things. And some students are more mechanistic learners. They'll understand if you say raise your soft palate and feel the depth of your larynx. And other people are more holistic learners. You say, imagine that your palate is floating, or something like, so you engage a more of an imagination direction. But you as the teacher have to know the anatomical facts. The anatomical facts about breathing, unless there's some physical abnormality, are the same for everybody. Everybody breathes the same way. It's the way human beings breathe.
Right.
What's different is that every human being feels and senses the breath differently. So for some people, the breath, the action of the inhalation musculature and the use of the breath feels like it opens the back. For other people, it feels like it goes into the pelvic floor. Other people feels like it's abdominal. Some people feel it's costal. So breathing is breathing, but everybody has a subjective experience of the objective facts. So that's why as teachers, we can never say, this is the way I feel it, you should feel it this way too. Or
Right.
how I was taught and this is how I do it, you should be able to do it. That's not actually healthy, in my opinion. That's not saying that the way we learn is wrong, but I think that as teachers, our job is to guide the student in the experience and understanding of how it works for them. Now, that's that topic. Now, the other one that you're talking about is how do you embody a breath that is healthy and balanced and not overbreathe. The concept of low breath, I think, has been misunderstood. The idea that we are supposed to breathe or feel expansion in the lower abdomen is actually also not anatomically correct. You have viscera down there. There's no breath. You do have some connection through the nervous system to sensation down there that does affect the way you breathe up here, especially through the vagus nerve, which travels all the way down there. But there's actually nothing to do down there for breathing. What you might experience. So what I do then as I come into, I look at the breath in terms of the shapes in the body that breath creates. So in the inhalation form in the body tends to be an upward lifting, sort of slight back bend in the spine that creates an opening in the chest and the ribs and sort of a lifting of the palate. The exhalation form in the body tends to be a sort of a rounded, more collapsed feeling in the abdomen and rounded shoulders and is dropped sternum. This is how we sit when we're watching Netflix. This is how when we're relaxed. This is how we stand when we get ready to sing. What I'm interested in singing is finding the balanced place where they're both possible at the same moment. So what I think you're right is that when singers take a deep inhalation and they try to create this feeling of remaining in the inhalation form while they're exhaling, what they're really doing is stimulating the sympathetic nervous response, which is your fight, flight, or freeze side, which is activated by inhalation. And so when you try to hold your breath, to control your breath, you're actually creating a state of anxiety in the body, in the nervous system, because you're prolonging the feeling of inhalation, which is the sympathetic nervous engagement. Conversely, when you exhale, you create parasympathetic dominance. That's the rest and digest. That's the calming side of your nervous system. What singing does is we lengthen our exhalation in our work. We actually breathe, exhale with sound. Singing should actually be a very relaxing activity because we become exhalation dominant in singing. But what most people do, and this is where the whole concept of appoggio, I think, has been misunderstood. Most people try to hold the breath and maintain the sensation of maintain the musculature and position in the body form of the inhalation while they're exhaling. And that creates anxiety and it locks the breath. So what we really need to do is we need to find the place where we're in a both and rather than either or shape in the body. And I think that has to do with neutral pelvis. I think that has to do with the whole structural alignment. But when you align the body in a certain way that allows breath to either come or go without trying to do the breath, then I think the breath becomes responsive and it becomes responsive to your artistic and emotional intention in the moment. So you want to develop that sense, and it really begins with how you align your body and not locking the inhalation or exhalation form in the body, but finding that both and place where you're in balance and your breath is responsive.
That's great. I thank you for agreeing with me. But I
think and again, I want to make sure we're not putting anybody down.
No, not at all.
That too. It's just understanding and even I think this is even something that has come to mindfulness in the last few years, even how we language things and how we approach our students and either demand things of them or lead them in a process of discovery. And that's actually the approach I take. I think that a teacher is not there to tell them what to do. A teacher is there to lead them in a process of inquiry, which leads them to practice. I'm sorry.
No. You're right. I think it's hard. When you come from that old school background of, like, I got really good catching things in the air because my teacher threw things at me. When you come from this very old school, my piano teacher smacked my hands right when I played wrong notes. If I didn't sound good in a voice lesson, and I'm thinking of one particular teacher, not all my teachers were like this, but one particular teacher who loved to throw things. She would also say things like, well, that really was awful. Why would you, I can't believe how awful that was. Those kinds of things and it was
Right.
do this, not what you would call a discovery. And I don't, that was not modeled for me. So I have to really work at, a more modern approach. Of course, I don't tell my teachers, my students, I don't throw things at my students. I don't curse at my students, and I don't tell them,
We live,
you suck. But
yeah, we live in a totally different time, right? We can't touch
yeah,
them. We can't throw things at them. We can't even speak like that to them anymore.
no.
And what I would say too is that, just to continue the idea of how these things imprint in us, everything you just said left imprints in your body. They left imprints of doubt, of shame, of of a sense of probably to some degree fear around singing.
Oh yeah.
Those things become the blocks in the chakras and in the energetic body that block the technique. So, so when somebody has, for instance, a lot of shame around, or has been shamed with language like that, like, why would you do that? You sound like a cow, blah, blah, blah. And it just takes one thing said,
Yeah.
even without, mindlessly said by a teacher, to put that kind of shame in a student, that literally will shut down this whole epigastria area in your body, which of course would affect breathing, would affect your ability to sing with agility, would affect your ability to support a sostenuto. So that's what is so interesting to me, is that we carry all of these things, and even from the voice studio, in our bodies, and then that affects the way we sing. So then we're in the process of trying to compensate and build on top of the blocks. And what happens, we keep layering and layering and layering and layering things on top of the blocks in order to try and make them better. But it's really, we have to remove the block, and we have to remove where the trauma is, or whatever it is that, where we feel that having that, I guess in some ways abuse, but having even that languaging has affected us. And so we live in a totally different time. We cannot do that anymore. We can't. I know teachers that would go up and grab their students by the ribs from behind, and say, breathe here. Can't do that. Can't touch people. Can't. So we need a new technology in teaching. And I think this is where it's swinging now toward this mindfulness, the sort of mind body awareness technology is finding its way into our pedagogy.
That's a great segue, Mark, because I have two questions. I know we have to wrap up, but we're going to take more of your time than we bargained with you. Two things I noticed on your website, and our listeners might want to hear more about your program for the mindful singer that you have with a colleague. And then also I want to hear about your poly training that's also listed on there.
Okay. So my colleague, Kyle Farrell and Megan Durham and I, last year we founded a week-long retreat for singers based in mindfulness techniques and all the things we've talked about: mindfulness, body work, dealing with the inner critic, all those different things, how we language things, and trauma-informed voice care, which is Megan's program. And Kyle is a meditation teacher and meditator, and I would bring the YogaVoice to it. And we were going to have this really beautiful week actually in Memphis. And
is that where Kyle is now?
That's where Kyle is now. Yeah.
Okay. I've sung with his wife on a couple of different things. Yeah. So I know them. I know him removed from her, but yeah.
Yeah. And then COVID happened and we couldn't. But we're finding new ways we're reimagining how we're going to do that in the future. And I think it's a really great idea. I think it's we'll see what happens. We do it. So we'll post about when we'll start that up again. So Poly is Prime of Life Yoga, Poly. And that is taught by, that's the program that my teacher, Larry Payne, founded and teaches. And it's about serving a demographic of people that has been underserved in yoga for a long time. And that's the 40 to 70 somethings. Right. And so a lot of gym yoga, for instance, is for what he calls the young and the restless, but really,
Oh, I
it's
like him already. He's funny. That's great.
but it's really for that time in life, actually, where you're in a building process. So he bases it in the 4 stages of life. Like the first stage of life is like birth to teens, when you're just, evolving. And then the second stage from your teens to your like 30s or late 20s is the building phase. And then from your 30s and 40s into your 50s and 60s and even 70s for some people is the maintenance phase. And then the later in life afterwards is the therapeutic phase. So we're looking at that prime of life segment where we have done a lot of work, we've done a lot of our building, but now we are interested in maintaining. And we're interested in creating balance in our lives and holding balance in our lives. And this is generally the time in life when we have some financial resource available, when we, our lives are settled, we're not, pushing our careers forward. So we're settling in. And this demographic has been underserved for most of the evolution of yoga in this country. So that's what Prime of Life Yoga is. And it's about honoring the whole person. It's about honoring where we are at different stages in life. It's about modifying postures and practices so we don't injure ourselves. And I think a lot of it has to do with self-acceptance and self-understanding. It has, what are the practices that are right for me now? So, so I've been certified in Prime of Life Yoga, and I think all of these different strands. So I've practiced Ashtanga yoga for a long time. I practiced Bikram yoga for a long time. I was trained in classical yoga, and then I've got this Prime of Life / therapeutic side to it too. So all of those come together in my work, and it's a sort of an eclectic background, but I find it helps really relate actually to singers and where we are in our lives, and it helps with aging singers, and it helps with young singers, and it's good for everybody.
Well, I want to brag on Mark a little bit more and tell him goodbye. I've had the chance to observe him working with older singers, young singers, and it's just been really fascinating and exciting to see the transformation. And thank you, Mark, for the mindfulness you brought to my life and for sharing with us today.
Thank
Denise, do you have anything else?
No, this has been great. We could go a lot longer, but we won't. But yeah.
Well, thank you both, and thanks for this opportunity to meet and talk. And
I'm gonna have to try to come to one of your classes or something. Although I'll tell you, I'm so stiff, but I'm
so everything on. I mean, we're doing everything online now, so you can do it in the privacy of your own living room, and again, so this is where the therapeutic and like the poly stuff comes in, because it's not about doing the perfect posture. If you're stiff, that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Actually, because that gives you something to observe. That gives you something to breathe into and observe and work with. So instead of having this sort of stigma around, well, I'm stiff and this and that, it's not about being anything. It's not about more flexible or being stronger. I mean, actually, it's just about being more self-accepting and whole. And then yoga really becomes about this, like Tony just said, this transformational process of wellness, of self-acceptance, of self-care. So it's a different approach than you'll find in the gym. And yoga is great too. I mean, I love gym yoga. I did it for many, many, many years. But it's when you were relating specifically to particular needs and people, there's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, it just is what it is.
Good. I'm glad to hear you say that. So if you could leave us with one pose that you think is great for singers, do you have one pose you could tell us to work on?
What do you think, Tony?
he's going to say, my guess, I'm just a gut guess, is he's going to say that there is no one, but everybody's different. They have something different to address. And
right. So each pose that we teach actually addresses a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are poses for chakra and your grounding and your stability. There are poses for hips and second chakra creativity. There's poses for third chakra, the agility and the fire. There's poses for the emotional connection to music and the
Sure.
and dynamics. So there are poses for these different things. I suppose, yeah, I don't know. There's not one.
How about posture? Because I feel like I work a lot of that with young singers who are, have cell phone, what I call cell phone posture,
Talk too much about posture. I talk about alignment.
my alignment.
Okay.
Yeah, posture implies holding something and positioning your body in a certain way. I know what the word means, and I know how it's understood, but I think it's better to talk about alignment, and the alignment is actually an internal awareness. So I talk a lot about stacking the domes of the body or the arches of the body. So the feet, the pelvic floor, the respiratory diaphragm, and your palate. And when you align
Interesting.
in a certain when you align those, then actually, guess what? Your posture has balance. But again, I think posture is a difficult thing because for some people, posture is subjective, right? You can look at somebody and say, you need to improve your posture, pick up your head. But to them, it feels like,
oh yeah.
So if you say, bring your head back, they may feel like they're sticking their chin up.
Of course.
Say, but don't raise your chin in singing. And they do that. So alignment is the key. And again, it comes from an internal awareness of energy and I think breath. Yeah. So, and
that's a lot to think about. I like that.
Yeah. And then, of course, again, just to finish the thought, if you think about posture, you're probably going to lock something in your body, like the inhalation form, right? Because most people think about if you say stand up straight, they're going to actually take the inhalation form, which lifts the spine, and then they're going to try and maintain that, and they lock the breath. So by thinking of alignment, you allow for that flexibility in the body to embody both inhalation and exhalation.
Bravo.
Yeah, lots to think about, and lots of. I love the new kind of the new paradigm there, and even new dictionary of words to use in teaching. I feel like teaching is one of those things that you never stop learning how to do, never, unless you're, not a very good teacher. But I feel like if you really care about being a really good teacher, you have to keep learning and discovering and being curious and open.
Yeah. I agree. I think if you stop learning, you should stop teaching.
Yeah.
And yeah. So, and I appreciate you recognizing this as a new paradigm. I do think it is. I do think there's a new language. I do think it's the 21st century approach to vocal pedagogy, actually. I often say that in the 19th century, we were, voice was about more holistic and artistic emphasis, and then it swung to the science in the 20th century, and now it's swinging to somewhere in between. And
that's great.
It's it's about becoming more and more authentic and less mechanistic.
That's awesome. That's great. Very, very good. Thank you, Mark, so much for being with us.
Well, thank you. I've loved.
Thank you so much for listening. We are very grateful that you joined us today.
If you like this podcast, please subscribe, write a review, share it with a friend.